And speaking of manufacturing consent, for a very, very long time, the American public has kind of been brainwashed into thinking, number one, if we're in a war with somebody, if you don't like it, you can get out, America, motherfucker. And then on top of that, we have the greatest Israel alliance in the Middle East. They are our greatest ally. That almost goes hand in hand with America, get the fuck out. And Israel is our greatest ally. And they have no idea what the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is. They just hear rocket bombs, and they just hear, that they hate Jews, and it's anti-Semitic, et cetera, et cetera. If you think anything other than that, and anybody that would question the military occupation of the Israelis in Palestine is obviously an anti-Semite. Now, all the mainstream coverage, and I mean all of the mainstream coverage. I've not seen any mainstream coverage that has
a lot of the alt media too.
What's that? Mostly in the alternative media too. No, I'd say there are a few people out there, obviously, the MFELs of the world, the Whitney Webbs of the world, the Taylor Hudaks of the world, the Slow New Days of the world, the Last American Vagabonds of the world. I don't know how you couldn't be speaking out. I mean, the things that are in my news feed, when I see a little girl's face off, carried by somebody else, I can't forget that. And if you think, after looking at the history of this, that somehow the Israelis have a right to be doing what they're doing, you're just not looking at the issues. And you're one of those people that, just like you fell for safe and effective, even though you don't know what that means, you fell for Israel is our greatest ally. So why don't you talk about that and talk about what's going on with the current conflict, because we just made a big arms deal with them. I think it was over $700 million of our weapons technology going over there. Netanyahu says he's not going to stop. Take it away.
Yeah. And remember, that's on top of the $38 billion over 10 years that's already going. During a pandemic, they claimed that, we're just going to keep shuttling money over there that comes out of your pocket while you can't feed your family. It's all about freedom. But yeah, this is a really hard, this topic really gets under my skin. Do you mind if I screen share?
Yeah, please.
Let's see. Oh, I forget how to do this on this platform. Sorry.
If you want to, you can always just DM me over on Twitter, whatever it is, and I'll bring it up on mine for sure.
Oh, here we go.
Okay.
Here we go. I got it. Here we go. So no, what I'm going to show you here is just a couple of important points regarding, let me know if it's on there.
Yeah, we got it.
Regarding, just the reality of the situation, right? Because as you're saying, this, the history of this situation is very clear, despite what you get from political arguments, because the UN has always maintained that Gaza is an occupied territory, right? And the history being that Palestine is an occupied territory that Israel is occupying. Now, the UN has never faltered on that point, period. Right. So they'll just say, well, the UN's an anti-Semitic or whatever. That's as if that justifies but they'll happily point to the UN when they say something they like about Syria or whatever. But we don't listen. It's anti-Semitic and untrustworthy when they talk about Israel. Right. The bottom line is it's an occupied territory. Well, since that, let's just start with this. This is something that I keep showing people because this is from the United Nations. Okay, this is the United Nations General Assembly, December 3rd, 1982. And this is from Geneva Conventions, okay? And it maintains, as always, and I don't have to go through the whole thing, but it's talking about occupied people and foreign domination. And just this one sentence, it reaffirms the legitimacy of the struggle of peoples for independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and liberation from colonial and foreign domination, foreign occupation by all available means, including armed struggle. It even lists them right down here after the Nambian people, the Palestinian people, and all other peoples under foreign and colonial domination, meaning they're saying Palestine is under foreign domination. But that also applies to people in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, any other place that's illegally occupied. But understand what that means, that they have the legal right to armed resistance. Right? So the point is, it doesn't matter what's happening, how it started. It's because they're illegally in this territory, which means that they have the right to push back. Right. So that's why we now see the leading human rights organizations, the leading Israeli human rights organization in Israel telling you, well, the killing of blockaded civilians, meaning they're not allowed to leave the location. That's also something the media lies to you about, and destroying infrastructure on a massive scale. Israel is committing war crimes. Right. And how about we talk about the Human Rights Watch telling you very clearly Israeli authorities and the crimes of apartheid and persecution. They're admitting that Israel's an apartheid state. Where's the media on all this stuff, right? Here's the Associated Press. The International Criminal Court is launching war crimes probe into Israeli practices. This gets obscenely ridiculous to pretend like the world doesn't see this because the Western press refuses to point it out. There's plenty more that we could get into.
Well, we could talk about Jimmy Carter, for instance, right?
And the elections. Yes, exactly.
Well, Jimmy Carter also wrote a book and had a documentary film come out called Peace, Not Apartheid, talking about the Israeli situation. And you have a guy like Netanyahu who, in just the last year, saying Israel isn't for everybody, quite clearly.
Right. In fact, he says clearly on the record, this is the state for the Jews alone. That's his words.
That's right. And anybody that doesn't want to acknowledge that, again, are doing mental gymnastics. If you believe in freedom of expression, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, that just doesn't jive. We don't have nation states that we recognize as world and military powers that do that sort of thing. In fact, if they do that sort of thing, normally we would call it what? A despotic dictatorship, a tyranny.
Well, I would add that in the world the way we pretend it is. I would argue today, right? Because I agree with you, but in the world it is today, I think that's the point: is they pretend to fight those things while they are in fact those things, right? That's what I think today is.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It is the literal inversion of reality that we have seen growing decade after decade after decade after decade.
Right.
It's not new, just like fake news wasn't a new phenomenon. This is something that's been going on a long time. And one of the video highlights, I think I retweeted it this week, was an old school congressional speech by Ron Paul, where he very fervently explained how Israel propped up Hamas. And then we brought democracy and they voted Hamas in, and now they get to fight Hamas. And it's this circular issue where they constantly manufacture some kind of enemy or threat that they can name so that they can continue to do this and oppress people and just say terrorists.
Right. Now, but it's important to understand, though, that at least, for instance, Robert would argue that that's not as simple as it was then. I agree completely. I've even written an article about that Hamas, at the very least, was influenced and allowed because it was used to point to justify their actions. Exactly what the U.S. government does all over the world. But it's gotten, at least the argument is that it's gotten out of their control.
Sure.
That it's shifted politically, that people are, that the people are supporting it, that they've gotten rid of people that would have done that. Doesn't mean that there's still not people involved that probably have inside information or whatever. But even as I understand it as well, Israel doesn't really even know the appropriate places to be hitting to stop what they're doing, which means they don't have a lot of intelligence in Gaza, which then would argue that that's not the case. It's interesting. That's why they're just destroying a bunch of civilian buildings in frustration. It's horrific.
And but the thing is, though, is it in frustration or is it to, again, instill fear randomized anywhere?
Both.
You know what I mean? And with impunity. That is a tough question because, like you said, there are these different sects. We're not on the ground when we're talking about espionage. There's an absolute reality, especially when you're in such close quarters there. People are people. We're fighters. Israel has a vast military-industrial complex. Everybody, especially if they weren't familiar, now with the Epstein case, is surely familiar with the Mossad. Those who have studied 9/11 know that the Mossad was heavily involved in some of the operations, especially in New York, but even outside of 9/11, was being investigated at the time for the largest spy ring in the United States in history. That wasn't just art students, and it wasn't just mall kiosks. It was all over the place. Those are the things that got highlighted. And again,
that went away real quick after the 9/11 push, right? Just got quiet.
Real quick. And you got to understand that was a real thing taking place before 9/11, connections to 9/11, and many of these people just got rushed out of the country with the help of good old Alan Dershowitz, our buddy.
Right. You wonder if that was an unintentional discovery of the whole plot, right? Like, so whether just the average, the FBI wasn't aware of what was being conducted on a national level, and that they discovered it and they were researching it, whatever, and it ended up where they got shut down from the top. You know what I mean? Like that happens where you have like we've seen discussions of that, like local police stumble into something, which then is forced to be pulled in from the FBI. And it's like you find out, oh, well, that was an FBI plot, right? But if it wasn't, that local police guy is the one that stopped it and stopped things from happening. You know, like that happens often. It's interesting to see, which just shows you this kind of supranational, like, you know, that they do things that are wildly outside the bounds, even at an international level, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ryan, what's going to happen with this? You know, obviously, it doesn't look like the military aspect is going to be at a ceasefire anytime soon. You have the squad out there kind of taking, you know, the side, at least, I guess, verbally proponents of what's going on in Israel. But then you see some of the things they voted for and some of the things AOC has signed off on, and it contradicts what they're saying on the floor. What's the next step? What's the next move? And what are we going to be hearing about it in the mainstream media? In other words, what's the false narrative we're going to have to smash?
Yeah, and that's hard. Robert and I were just talking about this as well, because there's a lot of things that could happen. With the way that Biden has been acting, you know, the things that he stated have seemed to, in the beginning, like, for instance, the fact that he didn't immediately come out and say something about this is a little telling. But what it ultimately tells you is, it's, you know, it could mean a lot of things, but it's interesting and it's noteworthy. And then all of a sudden we see him, you know, the argument is that $700+ million package was agreed upon before all of this. Like they're totally bound to it. Like they couldn't just stop it because they're murdering children, right? They act like we can't do anything about it. But so they sent the money, and then Biden kind of says, well, I support Israel, right? But it's been weird the way he's handled this. So it makes you wonder whether or not he's quibbling about, you know, he's unsure about whether or not he should support this right now because of how many people see this. You've got the squad using it politically. I don't believe for a second that they actually care, because like it's exactly what I was going to say. They've shown their hand on what they voted on and what they backed away from this whole time. But it's good. And I mean, who cares? As long as they're pointing out the problem, all for it. But I'm never going to support people that are being, you know, politically wishy-washy. Mm-hmm. But where this is now, it's important to understand. And all the data is there for everyone to see. It's very clear that, I mean, and even the New York Times pointed out that this started with settler violence. We now have, it's coming out left and right. You know, we have, who was it? Even John Oliver, of all people, for crying out loud, the master propagandist HBO guy, coming out and saying very clearly that this is, Israel's committing war crimes. You know, you could point out Hamas is doing things, firing rockets, but I'll point back to the UN document, which means that's legal, by the way. But then the point is, it even makes on his show, it's exponentially civilians on the side of Gaza. Like, it's like 10 to 1. It's crazy when you look at the full information. And the other side of it is IDF soldiers and, yes, some civilians, which is horrific. And I think it's sad for both Israeli families and for Palestinian families because the Israeli government is making this happen. But at the end of the day, it's so one-sided. And even John Oliver could point that out on HBO. It needs to show you that this is an aggressive war crime. Now, the point is, to your question, going forward, I think that this is going to go one of two ways. I think that they're either going to double down and try to make this just as bloody and violent and crazy as possible and pull in Iran and try to do everything that he's already doing. They're saying Iran's doing all of this with no evidence. So they draw in the United States. So they can pull in the United States to make political pressure, maybe even militarily on the ground, which would be chaotic. I don't think that's going to happen because it's just, this will be World War III. You're going to see Iran pull in. You're going to see Syria pull in. Right now you've got Lebanon launching rockets. Israel's terrified, in my opinion. I think they see how they're losing control of the situation and didn't expect this to go to the way it did. That's my opinion. And it's based on a lot of Robert's reporting as well. Mm-hmm. But it could go the other way. It could go where Israel realizes the U.S. might not support them the way they want them to. And you might see a de-escalation, maybe after some massive bombing, you know, to be like, we're strong, like we usually see, which will be a horrific war crime. And they'll say, okay, we've taught them our lesson and we're going to pull back, as if they succeed in whatever they were going to do. That's probably what will happen if the U.S. doesn't support them. Just a guess, but it's hard to say.
Well, I'd argue a few things here. Number one, I think we're in World War IV. Forget about it. World War III was the war on terror and establishing that. And now World War IV is kind of this last arm of the globalists using technology to try to create their great reset, their new world order agenda, the global governance of these different varying cartels, you know, whether it be Israel, Saudi Arabia, the military-industrial complex here in the United States, the Europeans with their units there. That's kind of why I want to shift gears into Israel and Israelis and outside of that conflict, because just like you said, it's horrific to see anybody die on either side. The Israeli people, more than any other condensed, westernized, first world populace, have gotten this green pass. Forget about just the boop boop. They've given in to something that is not even thinly veiled.
Well, it's not their choice, to be honest. There's a lot of them that are really unhappy about it.
Well, I get it. Absolutely. Absolutely. But thinly veiled to be not only something for health, but be taken place by the environmental movement. That's why they're calling it the Green Pass, right?
Exactly.
People don't get it. Like, oh, we can just shift this over. We've already imprinted green with, we're helping the planet with everybody else. This is part of the agenda. We know that CNN is going to be shifting the narrative from COVID into climate change, from the Project Veritas leaks. This is confirmed. So what are, aside from the irony that IBM is behind their specific Green Pass and are the same people that worked with Nazis in the tabulation machines to basically regiment all human beings in that region the way the Nazis wanted. And now you have the Israelis utilizing that same company to do the same exact thing on a vastly more technological level. So what are your thoughts there?
Oh, just on that specific point, I just think it's ridiculous. I mean, what it needs to show you is that it comes down to, look, there's a lot of discussions you could have about what really went down during World War II and who was on what side and who was, driving certain things. But just taking the narrative at face value, it's ridiculous just to watch Israel headlong rush into this fascist mindset. By the way, it's not a secret that the Zionist mindset has always been in that direction. But to see it happen so aggressively on their own people and create this divide between their people in the same regard, even going to the extent of giving people certain identification to say, well, you're not part of the okay crowd. It's just like, it's amazing that people that are, this is why we see people, the old woman from the Holocaust standing up and going like, this is the same thing. And it's just like, I love the idea that they're trying to say that woman's anti-Semitic. It's like, wait, what now? Like, it's like, this has just lost the plot now. It's crazy.
Listen, it is crazy. And that's the thing. And I think the key point that you just put out there is it's against their own people. And so many people out there, again, want to say this one group is totally behind everything, right? They put you in that very, very narrow box. And then, for instance, the Jews run everything crowd. If you know an Israeli or you've been to Israel or somebody is a practicing Jew, you're suspect, bro. Well, I just want to let everybody know, look what they're doing to their own Jewish people. Exactly. At the end of the day, the upper echelon of that very real Zionist movement and power that does have power within these power structures absolutely doesn't give a fuck about their own chosen people. That ain't the rap, bro. Okay, so if you can't see that from this especially and then open up your worldview to be like, holy shit, they do want to enslave literally everybody on that lower tier class. It's either you're with the predator class, very few minions that actually work for them are going to make it, by the way, or you're with humanity, and that's it. And they're going to come at you from all regards. It's like New Yorkers, they can't believe that it's something nefarious that they're going to get free Yankee tickets and a free Sam Adams beer and a Metro pass for a week. And Ohio's going to enter you into a lottery for $1 million to take the shot. Right. If that's not enough, you're in high school, you can't win that $1 million because of gambling laws, free college education, 4 years. They're offering a free 4-year. Hey, you're not smart enough to get in college? Don't worry. We'll give you 5 more shots. We'll get that IQ right up there.
I would be unhappy with that. I'd be like, well, that's not enough. You offer me $1 million. You're going to give me $100,000 for college? Screw that. Like 4 or whatever. I guess it'd be more than that, depending where you go, right?
Maybe
it will be $1 million depending where you go.
Ryan, we've been going for a little over an hour. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss that we didn't hit here you think's important that we should end on? Because, again, just like we started with, the world's a crazy place. We want to encourage people to take action. We've talked about a lot of things here, but going back to the very beginning, it's up to you, man. I'm looking out for number one, because if I'm not looking out for my friends, my family, what the future brings for my nieces, for children, for humanity, and you got to look in the mirror and decide you're going to be your own hero. There aren't superheroes on message boards. I'm still going to hold my governor's feet to the fire. There are a lot of issues out there I don't like. Just because we got this win doesn't mean we won the war. It was barely a battle. And just like Ryan said in the very beginning, even when they lose, they don't stop.
Right, exactly. I would just say to end on this, there's so many ploys in play. Just because we see this COVID-19 thing happening, they're still trying to make things happen in Syria. They're still trying to make there's a massive amount of things happening simultaneously from different angles. I mean, even to take the point about that classic concept about how, you can't say anything about the Israeli government without suddenly being a racist. That is a ploy put in place to stop you being able to hold accountable their government. And the crimes, their Zionist government, Biden's a proud Zionist, Pompeo is Mr. Zion. It's clearly infiltrated in other political spheres. We see this happening.
Pompeo and Netanyahu had an on-air I fuck love fest last year. I mean, literally looking at each other like they were going out for a steak dinner later and going to plow each other in the back room. I hope that people don't hate that, but they were making eyes at each other, folks. I'm not saying they're gay or gay's a bad thing, but I'm saying we were looking at each other romantically. You're just the number one stunner, Mike. We couldn't do it without you, Benjamin.
God. It's clear that they're so invested, and it's obvious that they're driving towards agendas that are not in the best interest of the American people. But the point is, to go back to that same argument, is that there's been the ploy there to try to undermine that, and that's happening everywhere. That's happening right now with the vaccine, the injection discussion. That's happening right now with all the stuff around COVID. It's happening with foreign policy. Right now with the Israel-Gaza discussion. Right? They want you to boil this down to they only hate Jewish people, but don't focus on these massive groupings of Orthodox Jews that are screaming about how the Zionists have hijacked Judaism. Don't care about that, right? Don't care about how you'll see the IDF rush into, Jewish synagogues and beat up these Orthodox Jews because they don't go along with the agenda, right? There's so many examples that's a ridiculous claim to say that it's all about either you hate Jews or you love Israel. They boil these things down to ridiculous two-party type concepts where you have the polarized ridiculous on either side, and it's the same thing. We are here pointing out that the government of Israel, which is a Zionist government, they're proud and open to say that, is actively committing war crimes according to the United Nations, according to Human Rights Watch, and a lot of other people, including the Israeli Human Rights Group. It's amazing that we can't say that without being called racist. It's fundamentally ridiculous, but the point is those ploys are everywhere. And we need to think past the political talking points or we're never going to see anything for real.
Well, right now, white supremacy is so hot in the narrative, they'll try to make you think that everything is white supremacy. We've seen actual Canadian Calgary mayor come out and say that anti-lockdown protests were thinly veiled white supremacist marches. That's how ludicrous it is. And just to give the example for this country, I love America. I do. I really love it here. Guys, I do. I love America. Doesn't mean I'm backing Dick Cheney, or doesn't mean I thought George W. Bush was the man.
Well, the country and the government are two very different things. And this is the most important thing to understand, is that the government is simply they're agents of the American people, or so we're told. That's not the reality anymore. But under our narrative, they're supposed to work for you. You're in charge. The democracy's in charge. Is that how this works today? Right. So when you're pointing out, look, that government, Biden or Trump or whoever, are killing people over there. They're starving people in Yemen. They're illegally invading countries. That's not anti-America. That's defending America. That's quintessentially American. That's how this country was founded. Look, our controlling factors don't care about us. Let's go somewhere. That's what this is about. And that's why they put in the Constitution that we can do that again. So if we so choose, but that's why they're so terrified of the Constitution, and every chance they get, they undermine it. Well, giving lip service to it when they get sworn in. These are hypocrites, man, across the board.
TheLastAmericanVagabond.com is where you can find him. It's at Your All Dunces on Twitter. I'm looking forward to your take on that Newsweek article. I can't wait for you to get into it because it is wild. Signature reduction. It's going to be, listen, in the next couple months, you're going to hear more and more about it in the alternative media because you're going to have to, because they're turning these people on American citizens and they're openly hyping it up with that 9/11 Commission style investigation into the Capitol incident and more. How do people support you when you go in live? What's next for TLAV?
As always, thelastamericanvagabond.com. The main website. It's where you'll find all my links and everything else. That's the best place to go. It's the hub. But today you can find me on all the alternative platforms, BitChute, Rockfin, Odyssey, but the new one is superu.net. I highly recommend you all check it out. I understand that there's a bunch of, I don't want to say anybody's name just in case they don't end up joining, but there's a lot of good people coming that were just, discussed by the team and coming on, but it's a YouTube alternative. And you'll find as this continues to grow out that it has everything. It's really it's the only other platform that has all the same things that YouTube does, all the embeds and the scheduling and the live streaming and everything else. So it's the more people that come and support it, the better it will be. And look, we're already being labeled as warning, this website is dangerous on Twitter already. Right? It's ridiculous. And just to clarify, since you said in the beginning, I'm just simply a consultant with this. I've been with SuperU helping this direction since over a year now, but I'm not financially invested in it. I just simply believe in what they're doing, But I feel like it's mine because I've been deriving the direction and giving guidance. No, this is what we should do instead of that. And and just take a look at the community guidelines, and you'll very quickly see that this was written by somebody who thinks like me. You don't find hate speech written in there anywhere, right? You don't find any of this nonsense. It's about basics, But thanks for having me on, brother. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Ryan. Like I said, we got to do it even more often. I think it was even over a month ago that you were on last time. And again, I learned so much. And we get to talk about things, especially on platforms outside of YouTube, very candidly, that you don't see in other shows. So keep it up, thelastAmericanVagabond.com. I love it. I'll see you soon, brother.
Thanks, brother.
All
Peace.
right, you got it. There he is, Ryan Christian, everybody. One of my favorite guests to have on. I do want to give a shout out before we go to a couple more of the Tipskis and Hutch that came up. Kevin Pass, two heroes right here. That's very kind of you to say. And then Curtis Gasser. Love you both. Sofa King. Much for being who you are and what you are doing for spreading the truth. I will always be a supporter. Thank you, Curtis. I appreciate that. And you can support me by thumbing this video up, subscribing, and sharing. The subscribers, in other words, the people that pay the $9.99, you get full access to everybody's premium content. And because I think I'm going to post this last segment over on YouTube, come on over for free, make the free account, and watch this hour 15-minute interview with a very insightful, intelligent human being. So guys, I love you. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you on the flip side.